Three comic creators talking about making comics. So, let's take a walk to the Geek Shop.
Welcome to another episode of Geek Shop. I'm Chetan. With me again is Chris. Say hi, Chris.
Hi, Chris.
And we have a special guest. Please introduce yourself.
I'm Emil Koepcke, creator and artist on Sinthetic.
And if
Welcome
you haven't,
again.
yes, this is his second appearance. Of course, definitely show off the books. That's cool. But I figured this time, rather than, I mean, we know a bit about your past and everything like that, but I figured this time it's just nice to have a third person to answer some of the questions that we have. So we're going to talk about like creating comic books and some of the questions. And we had a few ideas before this episode, so maybe we'll let's just get going into that. And for me, one of the things that's mysterious, and I don't even know how I do it sometimes, is how you lay out a comic book page. Like, where do you get your ideas? And we'll each go around. We'll go and I don't know, who wants to go first? Answer that question.
Well, you and I've done this before, so let's get our guest into it.
Okay.
All right. Well, I'm glad you asked me, or asked those questions, or put those questions out there first, because it gave me time to think about it. And what I really like trying to do is to keep the book as a page turner. You got an action on the right, and then you immediately just want to turn the page, find out what happens. So first and foremost, that's the way how I lay out the book. And then for the panels, I try to keep in mind that you read from left to right, like in a Z pattern. So that's the way I kind of want to illustrate the story. And as far as laying out panels, that's a good question. Where does that come from? So
to some degree, you might say that you kind of just zone out and just whatever seems to work works.
Yeah, kind of. I was going through my art and I found I've got three layouts that I kind of go to. I have like my basic, story that's just, ticks right along at the same pace, and then a chaotic page, and then a sequential page where I try to mimic film as much as possible, to get that feeling that there's movement.
Okay. So yeah, I guess it does depend on like what your characters are doing, what story thing you're trying to tell, and everything like that, right?
Yeah, exactly. Just like, if it's a fight scene, it's just, one right after the other. All the panels are the same size.
That's one thing I've noticed with your work, and I've been told the same thing, and I noticed it in your work. You have the traditional grid layout, old school grid layout, and I do that also. And
It works.
It worked. It works. It works. Why change it?
Yeah.
I do some grid, but I tend to do a lot of long panels. But I think that's because I was an animator, and so I'm used to the TV aspect ratio. So to me, when I go to a square, it kind of freaks me out a little. So I tend to go longer a little bit in my panels.
Well,
no, continue. Sorry.
Well, he was talking about, or Chris was talking about panel sizes. When you do like a long vertical, that's more of a relaxing, take it all in scene, whereas vertical creates tension and build up. So I try to keep that in mind too.
It's interesting. I never even thought of that, but you're absolutely right.
He's right. Yeah. See, that's the old school thinking, because you want to, you have to tell that story without words.
Right.
And what you just said conveys that perfectly.
Yeah. And the shape of your panel, it's amazing. Like a lot of early comic book artists don't realize how much the shape of their panel and the layout of their page will actually tell the story. Like that's part of the storytelling process.
Yeah. There's this one episode or one issue of G.I. Joe, that it was just all storytelling. I can't remember exactly what issue it is.
That was the
There's no
Snake Eye
word.
story. That was the
Yeah.
Snake Eye story.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's very
So
true.
that
Yeah.
was all. That was kind of cool.
That was very
And that
cool.
was great because you know what? And that's the first thing I remember, growing up reading articles on comic artists. They said, you should be able to draw and tell a story without any dialogue and show it to someone, and they should be able to understand what's going on.
Exactly. Hey, and another something else to kind of keep in mind is you always hear that saying, "A picture is 1,000 words." So you kind of got that with the art too.
The other thing I've always heard is that a lot of story happens in the gutters. So what happens from one panel to the next, there can be a lot of story in there that, is obviously you have to direct the imagination of the reader, but you have to let the imagination of the reader come through a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
So, that's another thing. Like in a fight sequence, you'll put less because you want punch, punch, punch. But then, you could have then another page between the gutter, it's 3 months that happen.
Yes.
And you kind of have to make sure you convey that. So I guess the other part of that, I mean, we got panel layout, but as far as like what you put in a panel, is there any tricks? Like one of the things I do is the first few panels of every sort of chunk of my story, I always put more detail in the background. So that way we're establishing our scene a little bit better. And then that way later on, I can eliminate a little more detail because we've already established that. And as long as every time we're sort of in a new place, I put, the first few panels, I always make sure it's like a nice establishing shot with lots of background. Then I can sort of go a little easier later on in that part of the story in that scene without having to do it. Is there anything you guys do sort of by the panel that might like what's inside the panel that might be some good tips for people?
That's a great tip for me, actually, because I tend to like set the scene like you were saying. And what I'm doing now is like heavy architecture. And I'm glad you said that establish it and then you can eliminate it as you go. So I'm definitely going to use that.
It's
now,
a good
nothing against you guys, but is that one of those things where, and I'm going to say I'm guilty of it also, you spend so much time on the first 2-3 pages, Dan, is a laziness that comes in and says, I need to finish the pages now?
I use it. I specifically use it. Like I'm conscious of it when I'm writing, and when I'm at the point when I'm not lazy and excited about the story. So I will specifically add more detail in the beginning and less later on because I want to also focus on the characters.
And also, I think like movies and TV shows and stuff, the first couple of pages, you want to get that reader into it. And if you don't have that reader into it, they're not going to be there halfway to the end. They're just going to skim through it.
Yeah.
I will also often end my comic book on a fairly detailed panel. So I sort of close it out, sort of like ending first of all, I make sure it's detailed every time that there's a scene change or like a change in location. Like I always make sure the first few panels are detailed, but I tend to end my last panel or even my last page will be a little bit more detailed to sort of just close it off, almost like the ride into the sunset.
I kind of, if it calls for it, I'll, detail it out. But definitely every, like you were saying, every establishing shot, set the scene and then you can like zoom in close on the faces, and overhead shot or something.
Exactly.
So you don't have to do it again.
Or sometimes you just put little details of what's in the background if they're relevant to what they're doing. Like, if they're fighting in a forest, you'd put the tree that they're, the guy's got him against the tree and punching it. You put the details of the tree, but you don't have to put the entire forest behind it. Just the tree that the guy's, punching the guy on or something like that. So it's like, choose your details after that point, only if they're specifically relevant to the actual sort of thing you're doing, like what if the character's interacting with the item. So,
So how much, question, Emil, how much details do you put in your layouts?
Well, when it comes to layouts, like in the early issues of Synthetic, I've tried to, incorporate the background into the borders because it was, industrial type stuff behind it. And I wouldn't so much put that in or have to put a background into the panels just because, the borders were, wires and stuff like that. So you kind of were still in that world.
Yeah. I have on occasion doing layouts. So before I do my artwork, literally put big industrial building, just written the words in my layout. And
But
be
see,
like, I'll figure that out when I draw it.
But see, that's an interesting thing both of you said, because I've seen artists and I know artists, friends and professional I've seen online and articles. Some artists will do stick figures. Others will put like Brian Boland. Look at his layouts. They're tight pencils. So, but on the other hand, I've seen some artists just do stick figures that you can't even tell. Like Chris said, they'll put, building, and write it out, and that's it. So, you have the extremes where, I guess what works for each person, and that's why I want, Chris and I always talk about this type of stuff. So we want a third party person to see how they do their layouts, to pencils, everything, and it's an interesting point of view because everyone has their own his or her own way of doing things.
Yeah, mine's not like super detailed. It's just more to get like an overall view of how the page is going to look. Does it read all right? And it's definitely not super detailed, but it's not stick figures.
Okay.
And the only kind of notes that I make is just like notes of dialogue that, just a couple words to kind of, okay, well, this is what he's saying. So the next panel is going to have a reaction to it. So
that's fair enough.
Now, going on something you posted on your Instagram page to cover to your new book, it was great seeing the process stage of that. And
yes.
the sketch part to the detailed pencils, then and I was surprised on when you did the two versions of the head, where you redrew it,
Oh God, I fought tooth and nail with that one. Like it did not look right, no matter what I did.
Yeah. Sometimes in my layouts, I'll actually put what kind of perspective, even though if I won't draw it necessarily. I might even put in a little note underneath it, like, oh, this will be a 1-point perspective background, or this will be like a 3-point perspective background, like just to sort of, I might roughly put it in, like really roughly put buildings or something in, but then afterwards will say like, I'll just put a little note on the side saying, okay, when you draw this, take your time and do like a nice 3-point perspective, measure it out and everything like that. So in layouts, I'll do that. And then, I just figure, and half the time I'm doing layouts, I'm doing like in front of the TV because I tend to get ideas and just scribble them out real quick. And I'm not like I rarely sit down and go, I'm going to lay out a book right now. It tends to be more like I have this story in mind and like, oh, well, I want this to look like this. And I'll quickly sketch it out while I'm sort of writing it out. And it may be an inconvenient time. So I don't necessarily have time to sit there and do the 3-point perspective, but I'll sort of hint at it and then maybe even put a note, do this in 3-point perspective or something like that.
Yeah. I don't do a lot of 3-point perspective. I do, but I don't use straight edges. I just wing it, And that's a bad thing to do because things don't look right and you end up fighting it later on. So I don't know.
But long as as long as it works and you're happy with it, I've done 3-point perspective, 2 points, and sometimes it's just like, just wing it.
Well, what I'm working on right now, I can show you. Like I said, it's going to have like heavy architecture in it, buildings and statues and oof. But anyway, I did use a ruler to get some straight lines, but I did not put the point of view and all that. But anyway, there's this. And you can see it's got some buildings in the background.
Yeah.
And statues up top. So
that's amazing.
That's a lot of detail on that page.
Yeah. I'm going to go overboard with that page.
Okay, so question for you now. What paper are you using to draw on?
It's just a Bristol board. I'm not. I'm not sure of the name brand. I think it's Strathmore. It's yellow. If you go into the craft store, it's got like the. It looks like a comic book page that somebody has made. Is on the
Okay.
front of it.
I think that's
Now,
Strathmore.
is it the yellow one is not yeah, I have right here. I think I have one of their pads. Yeah. It's yellow cover. I do have that. It's not
Yeah.
pre-ruled, but it's the same type of paper.
Yes. And then I have my board template that I put on it and get the 10 by 15, and I just go from there.
Now, okay, we talked about your paper. What pencils do you use to pencil your work?
Whatever's closest to me. I've got a tons of sets of pencils to use. I don't know. I just pick up whatever I've got near me. Whenever I first start a page, I try to use like a hard lead because it's light, and then you can go in with like a little bit softer and then build it out. But whenever I get the urge to do it, I have to do it right then. So whatever I grab is what I use.
See, that's great to hear because Chris and I talked about this before, where you know, young artists when we were younger, hey, we had to buy this type of pencil, that type of pencil, and stuff. And I just remember
That's
that
going to
old
make my
story.
art so much better if I can use a crow quill pen. You know, like, man, I just make a mess and this thing scratches the paper.
Yeah.
But I did it.
Okay, question for you, Emil.
Yeah.
What do you use to ink? What tools do you use?
I use, a couple brush pens. I've got brush pens. This one's my favorite. And then the good old standby microns.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
And then for like the heavy black areas that are a lot, I'll just take a brush and brush that because I can cover more area quickly.
So let me ask you this: when was the last time you used a crow quill? You mentioned that because it's been years since I've used one also.
Yeah, early 2000s. I don't even know. You get better results with just a black pen, I think.
I'll use one if I specifically need sort of a kind of messy line. Like sometimes if you're kind of going for something kind of maybe like a character's having a nightmare or something like that, and you want to sort of have them, it looks scratchy and a few flecks of ink happening and stuff like that. Like I'll use it and I'll use it poorly to sort of give me an effect. But other than that, like I have a lot of tools I do that for. Like I'm doing a part of Blue Orchid where there's a flashback scene, and so for the border lines for the layout, I used an old Japanese brush pen with some crappy ink, and so it's kind of scratchy and it's kind of leaving blobs to sort of do my border lines. So that way and I don't use a ruler because normally I use a ruler for all my border lines, but for this one I specifically didn't. I kind of even made it a little wavy. So I sometimes even will use tools that I'm not good with to give an effect.
Right. Yeah.
So
I think I've used a Q-tip before to get like little splatches or splotches.
Oh, that's a great idea. I never
that is a
thought
great
of
idea.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, you only get like a few off of a Q-tip before it's like just a big blob.
Yeah.
But they're
Or
cheap
What was
enough.
that? What was that? I'm in the process of putting together my old mini comics, photocopied mini comics before the computer age and all that stuff. I was noticing some of the backgrounds and what you just mentioned about the Q-tip. Chris, what was that thing called that sprayed out splattered paint effects?
Well, I mean, there's an airbrush, but wasn't there a marker one that?
No, it was the one that had it was like a T shape and you put it atomizer.
An atomizer. Yes.
That's it, atomizer.
Yeah, but that's like you're talking like that's a Renaissance invention that they still sold at art stores even when we first started.
And
So
I bought it because that was one of the few it was either that or taking a toothbrush and going like that and splatter effect. But
so
I
an
was
atomizer.
just about to bring up the toothbrush.
Yeah.
The toothbrush trick.
The problem with the toothbrush though is you have to basically cover everything around your art space with paper to protect it because that will get everywhere. Like everything.
But here's the thing. At what point did you realize you had to do that after you did your pages, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Of
all of
course.
us
Yeah.
are all of us are guilty of it. Going, why didn't I cover all of this stuff up?
Yeah. 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 There's a few people like Simon Beasley is an amazing artist, and he uses toothbrushes a lot for his like splatter effects. But he has
Oh,
like,
does he?
yeah, he uses like he's an airbrush guy, right? And so he knows the idea of like using like cardboard as like and all kinds of things like that to sort of protect and only use splatters. But he's a master of splatters. Like if you look at his old Lobo stuff, it's like he had splatters that would go specific directions because I just think he knew how to flick it just right. So
Yeah, I
That's
don't know if I could get it to go in a specific direction. It's
yeah,
pretty
that's
much
what I'm
just make a
thinking.
mess.
yeah, I think basically you have enough. Like I could picture he probably has like a bunch of toothbrushes that are worn in just the right way. That if you flick it just the right way, it sort of does it. Like I could also picture he's probably been doing it long enough. He probably trims toothbrushes to be worn just the right way, to splatter just the right way. Like I find guys like that have these tools, and I think we've talked about it in the past in other episodes of this, where it's like you see like the sign painter who has these brushes who are like he bought a set of brushes for like $3, but they're worn just the right way, and you can do beautiful paintings with them, even though they're cheap, crappy brushes. And I feel like guys like Simon Beasley also have probably like these old, worn out tools like toothbrushes, but he's been using them for so long that they do exactly the way what he wants, the way he wants it. So, you know,
I saw posting online on Instagram from Jim Lee. I guess he was on a trip somewhere and he had to finish a page or something, and he needed to trace the image. So he did it the old school way. He put it against the mirror in the hotel room,
Oh,
at the window, and he's tracing it. And I'm going, wow, that's old school. you
I,
know?
I've traced actually the borders like the when I do the page the size of my page that I'm drawing on because I don't have pre-ruled pages. So I'll do one. I have one that I have as a template, and I don't have a light box, but I have giant windows. So I will tape it to there, and I'll just sort of do my corners and my rough box for all my pages that I do. So the first thing I do is something like that.
And that's the old school way of doing it, and it works.
The only problem is you need a lot of sunlight, and so basically to get particularly when you're using like Bristol board, like a heavy Bristol board.
Oh yeah, you're right. Yeah.
that's what
And
I was
so
just about to ask. How are y'all seeing through that?
the way I'm doing it is I'm doing it in the afternoon. The sun comes right up to my window, and so it's blazingly hot, and I'm basically staring at the sun for like 30 or 40 minutes while I'm tracing. So I'm wrecking my vision is how I'm doing it.
Or it's better than the old way we used to do it, where you took your pencil and on the back of it, rub the graphite and trace it out onto your board.
No, I do remember that.
That was time consuming. That was time consuming and very, very messy because you had to erase those lines. You
Yeah.
know, I, and this is what Chris and I were talking about, where technology in the old days was so bad that it picked up everything,
Yeah.
and especially photocopiers.
So Emil, have you ever done like zine stuff? Have you ever done like photocopy stuff?
The very first time I made Synthetic was I had it printed at Kinko's, so
Okay.
it was pretty much a zine. I worked in a comic book store, and kind of sold them out of there.
Okay, I'm gonna cut you off on that one. You need to send us that file. We need to do a video on that.
Of the zine.
Yes.
Oh, I can go grab it right now.
No,
Well,
we'll do another episode on that one.
We'll definitely do another episode on that one on zines because we've been looking to do more episodes on zines, and I think if you started off on zines, we'll come back to that.
Well, there was only one issue of that done, and then life.
Yeah.
If you have it, and if you have any extra copies, please, Chris and I would be interested in a copy if you have one.
I will have to dig around. I didn't print too many, maybe like 10. So.
Wow. So what you're saying is, for all the synthetic collectors out there, if you have one of the 10 photocopies, that's like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles #1, first printing.
Yes, exactly.
That's the collectible one. That's the $10,000 issue of Synthetic because there's only 10 of them out there.
So can I ask, why did you? This is going to be a question. I mean, we could go into the zine episode, but you only printed 10. Did you take them around the stores or anything?
No, I worked at a comic book store, and I figure I could talk people into getting it from there. So
The best
And
salesman.
then, yeah, I didn't have a lot of money. I was early 20s, so it was.
The minute you said you worked at a comic store, you worked at a comic book store, I knew you didn't have a lot of money because I worked at a comic book store and they pay horribly.
And I worked at one also, so yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that
What's
totally
that
makes
famous
sense.
quote? Comics will break your heart, kid.
But here's the thing: at that age, money didn't matter on what you earned because you worked in a comic store.
That is true. That is true.
Very, very
Nowadays,
true.
you're thinking, "Hey, I got paid that much, and I really didn't get anything." But you know what? The experience was amazing.
And the discount.
And the
Yes.
discount.
Yes.
So
So
I think.
no, we yeah. Sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say, is there anything else we need to cover in this? I mean, this is like an intense episode.
Yeah, and we'll post some images of his pages. So show Emil will send us. We'll post your pencil pages and ink pages so people could see what they look like, and if he could, we'll give a link to the tools he uses also.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Well, I mean, I could show you my 3 examples of like the storytelling, the pacing, and then the chaotic pages.
Yep. Let's do. Can you do it right now?
Yeah. I went
Yeah.
through and pulled them last night.
Let's do
Yeah,
it.
let's do
Let's
that.
close
Yeah.
off this episode. Explain your pages.
All right. Well, like I was saying earlier, I've got my the ones where I try to mimic film, and I think this one was pretty successful. See, you got the monster up here, and it goes all the way across the 3 panels, and then the 3 panels kind of change as it goes, but she's stagnant,
That's awesome.
So, and then here's another one. Synthetics knocked out on the ground, monsters approaching, and he just gets bigger. But
yeah,
he's stagnant.
That's a
at
great
the bottom.
page.
That's awesome.
And then that page leads into this page, and see the vertical panels.
Oh wow!
So it kind of builds up intensity.
Yep.
And then, so that's like my mimicking film. And then this is my stack of stagnant. Everything's kind of evenly paced. The panels are all the same.
Now for the blacks, are you using India ink or is it like a Sharpie?
Oh no, it's India ink. Like the heavy blacks. I don't know if you can see the deep or you
Okay,
can see.
now I could see it. Okay.
Yep.
No, that's what I was wondering because sometimes I've used thick Sharpies and sometimes I use India ink. So that's why I was wondering what for the heavy blacks, what's easier?
Yeah, I don't use Sharpies at all. I like the blackness of the India ink.
Now here's a question with the India ink. Which one do you use? Because there's artists that say certain inks are better. Some leave streaks. Some are solid black. Some have matte black. Every artist is picking on which inks they use.
Bombay.
Bombay. Yep.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I use the Winsor Newton.
Sometimes I'll just, if I've got a lot of black area to cover, I'll just put the blob down and then brush it out.
I've had it where I bought ink and sometimes when you go across the page, you could see the streak lines and it's a different. It's black, but it's not one stroke is darker than the other one.
Yeah. Do you shake it up before you start using it?
Where were you when I was inking my pages?
But
see, I'm learning something new today.
when you say that, though, I mean, the last time we talked about, when you look at original art and you see all the imperfections, that's gives it life to me.
Yeah.
So
Chris, I learned something new today.
Look at that. So you got your film stuff, you got your sort of more panely stuff, and then you said there was another one?
yeah, the evenly spaced panels. Here's another one. Everything just kind of,
Just sort of standard 9-panel grid.
yep. And
Yep.
you know what works great? Those panels I used, the template, is just a cassette tape, an old cassette tape.
Really?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Wow. Hey, actually never thought about that. That's a perfect panel size.
Yeah.
If you horizontal and vertical, it's a perfect panel. Wow.
You learn two things.
I need something for circles and arches. I can't find that anywhere.
Now here's the problem. Where do I find a cassette tape now?
Thrift store. You can go to thrift stores and find them. I saved mine, so I still have a tape collection.
If we do have any young viewers, Chris, we have to put a disclaimer at the bottom and explain what a cassette tape is.
Exactly. By the way, for circles, I collect lids for jars.
I've done that also. I've done lids, and I even took plates.
Yep. So, and the nice thing about lids, yeah, I was gonna say the nice thing about lids is you can use them to hold your ink when you're doing your inking too. So it's like it's a double process.
Oh, that's a good idea. That's a real good idea.
Sorry, you were about to say something, Emil?
Yeah, you were saying you use plates too, right?
I've used plates before. It seems like I always need one that's bigger, because I just need.
Yeah.
I've done that where I needed to do my compass just goes a certain way, and I was like, okay, what do I need? So I went into the kitchen looking around for things, and that's when I realized, oh, use a plate,
Yeah. So do you have one more style of page to show us?
Yeah, I kind of call this like the chaotic, where we might have like the standard grid and then chaos. And then like this was always one of my favorite.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, that's kind of all over the place, but it works with the story.
Yeah. But yeah, I broke my art down.
So
Pacing.
looking at your pages, question for you, and Chris, this is a question for you also. Panels. Some of the panels you have borders that are filled in black. I've heard there's some artists say no, panels should have white gutters, not filled in black gutters.
I've never even thought about that.
I think as long as your story works, who cares?
Yeah.
That's what I think. But I remember reading somewhere where there's a talk about that. Saying no, you shouldn't have fill in black gutters.
I disagree.
Because it was an article on Keith Giffen actually. He didn't even put gutters. He just put lines.
I'm guilty of that, just putting lines.
Yeah, he didn't. Yeah. But again, I guess like Chris said and you said, if it works, do it.
Yeah. Those chaotic pages, it's like the panels are kind of stacked on top of each other, and they're kind of overlapping. So, yeah, I'll just use a line to.
Now I don't remember in your synthetic books. Have you ever done a double page spread?
Yes.
I'm trying to remember. I have to look through it again.
Yeah, look at issue 6. There's a double page spread.
Okay. I'm gonna look at that again.
And then the one I'm working on now, I'm doing the old Jack Kirby opening. Splash page, flip it over, double page spread, and then the story starts kind of pacing out after that.
Okay, so Emil, question for you. Chris and I were talking about this. It's going to be in one of our episodes. Are you? I haven't seen in your artwork, using photographs or collages or anything like that for backgrounds.
Oh, it'd be easier for me to just draw it out because I'd spend so much time and get caught up in finding the perfect photo to use. So
Interesting.
Chris, Emil just brought up a point. We didn't even think about that, Chris. The
Yes.
time you're spending looking up that reference material, you might as well just draw it out.
No.
On occasion, it depends on your book too. Like if you're where your settings are at. Like a lot of stuff I draw takes place in Southeast Asia in a city. So like what I tend to find is if I don't look stuff up, I tend to go once a week. I go for a walk and just take pictures of my surroundings. And what I tend to find if I don't do that, I'll like sort of rely on certain details for backgrounds over and over again. And it ends up looking like the background for an old episode of Spider-Man, where it's just the same thing happening over and over again instead of having new features and new things. So for me, my brain won't allow me to not go out and find reference, or else I'll just get lazy and just draw like the same air conditioning unit in every building over and over again, so.
Yeah. I don't know. I figured I'd do it once. I don't know. I can't duplicate that same image, so it's going to be changed no matter what.
Yeah.
So.
Now, question for you, what we talked about earlier, for your covers. Do you just go with one layout and say, I'm going to do this, or do you go for multiple layouts and go, like we talk about the angle of the head and stuff like that? Do you have a couple of different cover ideas, or do you have one set in place?
I'm very indecisive. My first drawing for the cover definitely is not going to be the same layout or even related. It's
Do you know that you're going to do that? So do you you'll use crappier paper and you'll be like, I'll draw this out a few times? Or are you on the same piece of paper and just erasing and drawing and erasing and drawing? Like, what do you?
I'll use different paper
Okay.
because in that time period, I'll get other ideas and start, working on that, and then go back and well, that's not going to work anymore. So this kind of cover would be better.
Now, do you do your cover first, or do you do the story first?
I did the cover first on this one because I've had real motivation issues, to get it done. And I figure if I got a cover, that's going to motivate me to, carry on to the rest of the book. So.
Yeah, I tend to be the same way. I do my cover first, and most of the time it's just because between issues, I like to sort of not be drawing a comic book for a little while. So I'll just sort of do random drawings, and a cover will come out of that.
Oh,
yes. Yeah.
You never know.
You never know what's going to give you that inspiration, though.
Yeah.
No, but that's now. Oh, sorry.
I was going to say, particularly for me, because for every Blue Orchid is monster-based book, and so I have to develop a monster. We mentioned this when we talked before that I have my stories worked out. The specific what the monster is going to be isn't necessarily worked out. So often in between the issues, I'm sort of sketching out ideas for monsters for the upcoming issue. So that's why generally one of those sketches will probably turn into the cover. Sort of my concept sketch for one of the monsters will turn into the cover. So that's sort of how I tend to do it.
So Emil, to close off this episode, where can people find your book?
They can find it on Amazon. You can get the first 4 issues there. And then 6 and 7, I have printed copies. You have to contact me to get those.
So we'll put a link at the bottom, how to contact Emil through website, Instagram, and his Amazon page.
Yes.
For sure.
Or they can email me directly at atomicgraphics@gmail.com.
Okay, we'll put that link down also.
And I hear you occasionally, you mentioned last time, occasionally you'll do live appearances in places. So keep an eye out for those.
Yes, yes. Every once in a while.
That's awesome. And you can get one signed, and maybe, and if you have one of those 10 zines, if you get it signed, then
Zines,
it's
yes.
$20,000 instead of $10,000 for the rare, you know, one of the 10 copies of that zine. So make sure to get one of those signed. So thanks for being on.
One of my Facebook friends, he actually has one, and he had mentioned it a while back. I was like, oh, you kept it.
That's awesome. That's all. Chetan actually has more copies of my zines than I do. There's a few issues I'm missing in my early work, but I think he has my complete collection. So,
Okay, well, I'll give them to you when we see each other when you're back in Canada again.
I prefer that you have them. I think they're in better hands than if I had them. So I think we should wrap this up. Thank you for being on.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I love doing this. So.
And I think we'll do another episode about zines, because we've been talking about doing it. And just knowing that your first Synthetic was a zine, we can get into the process of how you built it and how you because building zines, you have to learn by yourself. There's almost no instruction to how to do it. So we're trying to build a bit of an archive of teaching people how to do it. So we'll have you back and we'll chat about how to make a zine.
So the best thing to say is stay tuned.